The Sunstone Kingdom, a saga of ancient Egypt.
In the vast, unforgiving expanse of the North African desert, a lifeline pulses. The Nile, the longest river in the world, carves a ribbon of impossible green through the scorched red land. For millennia, this river has been the heart, soul, and lifeblood of a civilization without parallel. Each year, its predictable floodwaters would swell, depositing a thick, fertile layer of black silt upon its banks. This was Kemet, the Black Land, a gift from the gods that allowed life to flourish where it should have been impossible. In contrast, the endless desert stretching beyond was Deshret, the Red Land, a place of chaos, danger, and death. This duality, order versus chaos, life versus death, the Black Land versus the Red, would define the very essence of ancient Egyptian thought and culture for over 3,000 years. The story of the pharaohs does not begin with a grand empire, but with scattered communities of hunter-gatherers and early farmers who settled along the snowy banks of the Nile around 6000 BC. Over thousands of years, these small villages grew into larger settlements, developing distinct cultures in the two main regions of the land, Upper Egypt in the south, a long valley, and Lower Egypt in the north, the wide marshy delta where the Nile meets the Mediterranean Sea. They were two separate lands with different customs and different gods, symbolized by the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt. The path to unity would be forged through conflict and conquest, culminating around 3100 BC, with a powerful ruler from the south known to history as Narmer, or perhaps Menes. The unification is immortalized on the Narmer palette, a ceremonial cosmetic palette that is one of the most significant artifacts from the dawn of Egyptian history. On one side, Narmer is depicted wearing the white crown, clubbing a northern enemy. On the other, he wears the red crown, inspecting rows of beheaded foes. The message was clear and absolute. The two lands were now one, under the rule of a single divine king. This was the birth of the first dynasty, and the beginning of pharaonic Egypt. With unification came the need for a central capital. The city of Memphis was founded, strategically located at the apex of the Nile Delta, the very point where Upper and Lower Egypt met. From this administrative and religious center, the early pharaohs solidified their control, establishing a system of governance, taxation, and trade that would be the bedrock of the state for centuries. The most crucial concept developed during this early dynastic period was that of divine kingship. The pharaoh was not merely a ruler, he was a living god, the earthly incarnation of Horus, the falcon-headed god of the sky. He was the indispensable link between the mortal world and the divine realm, the sole guarantor of Ma'at, the cosmic principle of order, truth, and justice. His health and success were directly tied to the prosperity of the entire nation and the stability of the universe itself. This profound belief in the pharaoh's divinity demanded a new kind of eternal resting place. The early rulers were buried in mastabas, flat-roofed, rectangular structures made of mud brick, built over a subterranean burial chamber. While impressive, they were still fundamentally earthbound. It would take a visionary genius to create a monument that could truly bridge the gap between the earthly and the divine. That genius was Imhotep, the vizier and chief architect to King Dosher of the Third Dynasty, around 2670 BC. At the necropolis of Saqqara, a snowy plateau overlooking Memphis, Imhotep conceived of a revolutionary idea. Instead of a single mastaba, he built 6, each smaller than the last, stacked one on top of another. The result was the Step Pyramid, the world's first large-scale stone structure. It was a stairway to the heavens, a physical manifestation of the king's ascent to join the circumpolar stars, the eternal unsetting gods in the northern sky. The Step Pyramid complex was a marvel, a city for the dead enclosed by a massive wall, complete with functional temples, chapels, and courtyards, all meticulously crafted from stone to last for eternity. Imhotep's achievement was so monumental that he was later deified, worshipped as a god of medicine and wisdom for millennia to come. The Fourth Dynasty, which began around 2613 BC, took Imhotep's vision and perfected it, ushering in the golden age of pyramid building. The The first king of this dynasty, Sneferu, was the greatest pyramid builder in Egyptian history, a monarch obsessed with achieving the perfect form. He constructed 3 massive pyramids, experimenting with design and engineering. His first attempt at Meidum collapsed. His second at Dashur, the bent pyramid, began at a steep angle of 54 degrees, which proved to be unstable, forcing his architects to change the angle to a shallower 43 degrees halfway through construction, resulting in its distinctive bent shape. Undeterred, Sneferu commissioned a third pyramid nearby, the Red Pyramid, built from the start at the successful 43-degree angle. This was the first true smooth-sided pyramid, its form a flawless representation of the Benben, the primordial mound that arose from the waters of chaos at the creation of the world, and a symbol of the sun's rays. Sneferu's son, Khufu, inherited his father's ambition and commissioned the single most massive and awe-inspiring structure ever created by human hands, the Great Pyramid of Giza. For 2 decades, a nation poured its resources, labor, and faith into its construction. This was not the work of slaves, as Hollywood and ancient Greek historians would have us believe. Archaeological evidence from the Giza Plateau, including a sprawling workers' village, bakeries, breweries, and cemeteries, reveals that the pyramids were built by a dedicated, well-fed, and well-organized workforce of skilled Egyptian craftsmen and laborers. They were citizens, working for their god-king, out of a sense of civic duty and religious devotion, believing that their participation in this divine project would ensure their own share in the eternal order of Ma'at. The logistical and engineering feat of the Great Pyramid is staggering even by modern standards. An estimated 2.3 million blocks of limestone and granite, some weighing up to 80 tons, were quarried, transported, and lifted into place with astonishing precision. The structure was aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal points of the compass, and was originally cased in polished white Tura limestone, which would have shone brilliantly in the Egyptian sun, a beacon of divine power visible for miles around. Inside, a complex system of passages leads to the Queen's chamber, and finally to the King's chamber, a magnificent room built entirely of red granite, where Khufu's sarcophagus still rests. Khufu's son Khafre built the second pyramid at Giza, slightly smaller but appearing taller due to its construction on higher ground. He also left behind an equally enigmatic monument, the Great Sphinx, carved from a single massive outcropping of limestone. This colossal statue with the body of a lion and the head of a king, likely Khafre himself, stands as an eternal guardian of the necropolis, a symbol of royal power and divine wisdom. The third and smallest of the Giza pyramids was built by Khafre's son, Menkaure, completing the iconic trio that has mesmerized the world for 4,500 years. The Old Kingdom was the age of the God King, an era of supreme confidence, stability, and monumental achievement. The state was a vast, efficient machine, all geared towards channeling the nation's wealth and labor into the construction of these eternal monuments. However, this immense expenditure could not last forever. By the end of the 6th dynasty, the power of the pharaoh began to wane. The construction of massive pyramids had placed an unsustainable strain on the central treasury. Simultaneously, the provincial governors, or nomarchs, who administered the regions of Egypt on the king's behalf, grew increasingly powerful and autonomous, building lavish tombs for themselves in their home provinces and treating the century of chaos that was the first intermediate period left Egypt scarred and divided. The divine authority of the pharaoh had been shattered, and local rulers, particularly from Heracleopolis in the north and Thebes in the south, vied for supremacy over the fractured land. It was from the south, from the city of Thebes, that the impetus for reunification would arise. The Theban rulers, a line of determined and ambitious nomarchs, slowly consolidated their power over Upper Egypt. Their city, once a minor provincial town, was destined to become the new religious and political heart of the nation. Their principal god, a local deity of war and fertility named Montu, and later the hidden creator god Amun, would rise to national prominence. The final struggle for reunification was led by the Theban ruler Mentuhotep II, a name that means Montu is satisfied. Around 2055 BC, after decades of intermittent conflict, Mentuhotep II launched a final decisive campaign against the Heracleopolitan kings of the north. His victory was absolute, and he once again brought the two lands under the rule of a single pharaoh. This moment marks the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, a period often regarded as Egypt's classical age, an era of reunification, cultural flourishing, and profound changes in religious and political thought. Mentuhotep II, now ruler of all Egypt, established his capital at Thebes. He embarked on a program of centralization, re-establishing the administrative structures of the Old Kingdom, but with significant reforms. The power of the provincial nomarchs, which had grown so dangerously during the intermediate period, was curtailed. The pharaoh was once again the supreme head of state, but the memory of chaos had left its mark. The concept of kingship itself began to evolve. While still divine, the Middle Kingdom pharaoh was portrayed less as an aloof, untouchable god, and more as a good shepherd, a ruler responsible for the care and well-being of his people. This is reflected in the art of the period. Royal statues often depict kings with careworn, realistic faces, bearing the immense burden of their office, a stark contrast to the serene, idealized portraits of the Old Kingdom pharaohs. Mentuhotep II commemorated his reign with a magnificent and innovative mortuary temple built into the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari, on the west bank of the Nile at Thebes. This terraced temple, with its colonnaded halls, was a fusion of a tomb and a temple, a testament to the renewed power and artistic vision of the reunified state. The 12th dynasty, founded by Amenemhat I, is considered the zenith of the Middle Kingdom. These were powerful and effective rulers who brought stability and unprecedented prosperity to Egypt. They moved the administrative capital back to the north, to a new city called Echetawi, strategically located to control both Upper and Lower Egypt. However, Thebes remained the supreme religious center, and the god Amun, now often merged with the sun god Ra to become Amun-Ra, began his ascent to become the king of the gods and the supreme deity of the Egyptian empire. The pharaohs of the 12th dynasty were masters of resource management and military strategy. They undertook massive irrigation projects, most notably in the Fayum Oasis, a large fertile depression west of the Nile. By damming and channeling the Nile's overflow, they reclaimed vast tracts of arable land, turning the Fayum into the breadbasket of Egypt. This concern for the land and its people reinforced the image of the pharaoh as a benevolent provider. Militarily, the Middle Kingdom saw a more assertive foreign policy. The southern frontier was pushed deep into Nubia, modern-day Sudan, a land rich in gold, ivory, and other precious resources. A series of massive mud brick fortresses, some of the most formidable military installations of the ancient world, were constructed along the Nile in Nubia to control the local population and protect the vital trade routes. These fortresses, with their towering walls, dry moats, and complex gate systems, were masterpieces of military engineering, manned by standing garrisons of Egyptian soldiers. To the northeast, campaigns were launched into the Sinai to secure the valuable copper and turquoise mines, and trade relations were expanded across the Mediterranean and the Near East. This era also produced some of the greatest works of Egyptian literature, tales like the story of Sanuhe, an epic narrative of an Egyptian official who flees into exile and his eventual return, explored complex themes of identity, loyalty, and divine providence. These literary works, along with philosophical texts like The Dispute Between a Man and His Ba, reveal a culture of introspection and a new depth of human expression that was a hallmark of the period. Despite its stability and prosperity, the Middle Kingdom's strength began to wane during the 13th dynasty. A succession of short-reigning kings weakened the central authority, and once again the state began to fracture. This internal weakness coincided with a new and formidable external threat. For decades, Semitic-speaking peoples from the Levant, known collectively as the Hyksos, had been migrating and settling in the eastern Nile Delta. Initially, they were traders and workers, but as the central government weakened, they established their own independent rule in the north. The Hyksos were not a destructive horde of invaders, as later Egyptian propaganda would portray them. They were a powerful ruling class who adopted many Egyptian customs, including the pharaonic titles. However, They also introduced revolutionary new technologies of warfare to Egypt, things the Egyptians had never seen before: the horse-drawn chariot, the powerful composite bow, and advanced bronze weaponry. Their capital at Avaris in the eastern delta became a major cosmopolitan center of trade. For over a century, Egypt was once again divided. The Hyksos kings ruled Lower Egypt, while the native Egyptian pharaohs of the 17th dynasty held on to their ancestral homeland of Thebes in the south, forced to exist as vassals to the foreign rulers. The humiliation of this period fostered a deep-seated resentment and a burgeoning sense of nationalism among the Thebans. The stage was set for another war of liberation, a final bloody struggle to expel the foreigners and restore Egyptian sovereignty. The war was initiated by the Theban king Seqenenre-Tau, who, according to legend, was provoked into conflict by the Hyksos king Apophis over the noise of hippopotami in a Theban pool hundreds of miles away. The tale is likely symbolic, but the conflict was real and brutal. Seqenenre-Tau's mummy reveals that he died violently in battle, his head smashed by multiple axe blows. His son and successor, Kamose, continued the fight, launching a daring raid up the Nile and reaching the outskirts of Avaris itself. He documented his campaigns on stele, recording his determination to rescue Egypt, which the Asiatics have trampled. But it was Kamose's younger brother, Ahmose IV, who would finally succeed in driving the Hyksos out of Egypt. After a long siege, he captured the Hyksos capital of Avaris, chasing their armies out of Egypt and across the Sinai. Ahmose IV was a pivotal moment in Egyptian history. He had not only reunified the country, but had also laid the foundations for a new era of unprecedented power, wealth, and imperial ambition. With the Hyksos expelled and the nation once again whole, Ahmose IV became the founder of the 18th dynasty and the first king of the New Kingdom, the Age of Empire, and the Golden Age of the Pharaohs. The lesson of the Hyksos occupation had been learned. To prevent foreign invasion, Egypt must become an imperial power, projecting its strength far beyond its own borders. The expulsion of the Hyksos under Ahmose was about to be replaced by the warrior pharaoh of a new and glorious empire that forged a new Egyptian identity. The trauma of foreign occupation had burned away the isolationist mindset of the past. The pharaohs who founded the new kingdom understood a stark new reality. To ensure Egypt's survival and prosperity, they could no longer wait for threats to arrive at their borders. They had to dominate. The age of the shepherd king was definitively over, replaced by the era of the warrior pharaoh, a golden-clad conqueror leading legions of chariots into distant lands. Egypt was about to build an empire. The early pharaohs of the 18th dynasty wasted no time. Ahmose's successors, Amenhotep I and Thutmose, were relentless campaigners. They pushed the southern border deeper into Nubia than ever before, securing the gold mines that would become the engine of Egypt's imperial economy. Thutmose was a particularly audacious military leader. He led his army north into the Levant, a region of strategic city-states controlling vital trade routes. In a campaign that became legendary, he marched his forces all the way to the Euphrates River in Mesopotamia, setting up a victory stela on its banks and declaring it the northern boundary of his empire. For the first time, Egypt was not just a regional power but a major player on the international stage, clashing with other great empires like the Mitanni. The new weapon that made this expansion possible was the chariot, mastered from their former Hyksos rulers. The light, fast, two-man chariot became the backbone of the Egyptian army, a mobile platform for archers that could shatter enemy infantry lines and pursue fleeing foes with terrifying speed. Upon the death of Thutmose II, the throne passed to his son, a young boy named Thutmose III. As he was too young to rule, his stepmother and the late king's great royal wife, Hatshepsut, stepped in as regent. What followed was one of the most remarkable and unconventional reigns in Egyptian history. Hatshepsut was a woman of immense ambition and political skill. After a few years as regent, she did the unthinkable. She declared herself pharaoh. She adopted the full royal titulary, was depicted in the traditional male regalia of a king, including the false beard, and ruled not as a queen but as a co-ruler with her stepson, though she was clearly the senior partner. To legitimize this radical break with tradition, she commissioned a sophisticated propaganda campaign. Temple reliefs depicted her divine birth, claiming the god Amun-Ra himself had visited her mother in the guise of her father Thutmose I to conceive her. She emphasized her royal bloodline and her appointment as successor by her father, presenting her rule as the fulfillment of a divine plan. While she did not neglect the military, her reign was largely a period of peace, prosperity, and architectural splendor. Her greatest achievements were not on the battlefield but in trade and construction. She commissioned a great trading expedition to the fabled land of Punt, likely modern-day Eritrea or Somalia, a place of exotic luxuries. Her ships returned laden with incense, myrrh, ebony, ivory, gold, and live incense trees, which were then successfully planted in the soil of Egypt. This expedition was a triumph of exploration and commerce, celebrated in detailed reliefs on the walls of her masterpiece. That masterpiece was her mortuary temple, Djeser-Djeseru, the holiest of holy places, built in the Bay of Cliffs at Deir el-Bahri, right next to the temple of the great unifier Mentuhotep II. This stunning, elegant terrace temple, with its light-filled colonnades and vibrant reliefs, is one of the most beautiful structures ever built in Egypt. It was a monument to her piety, her achievements, and her legitimate right to rule. For over 20 years, Hatshepsut governed Egypt effectively, bringing wealth and stability to the land. When Hatshepsut died, Thutmose III, now a grown man who had been waiting in the wings for 2 decades, finally became the sole ruler of Egypt. His reaction to his stepmother's reign was complex. For the first 20 years of his rule, he left her monuments untouched. But late in his reign, a systematic campaign was undertaken to erase her from history. Her statues were smashed, her name was chiseled out of cartouches, and her image was removed from temple walls, often replaced with that of her father, husband, or Thutmose III himself. This was not an act of petty revenge, but a calculated political move to restore the traditional, male-only line of succession and erase the precedent of a powerful female king. Freed from his co-regency, Thutmose III unleashed his pent-up military energy and proved to be one of the greatest military geniuses in history. He has been called the Napoleon of Egypt for his strategic brilliance and relentless campaigning. Over the course of 17 campaigns in 20 years, he marched into the Near East, crushing a coalition of Canaanite princes led by the king of Kadesh at the decisive Battle of Megiddo. His brilliant strategy, taking a risky, narrow mountain pass to surprise the enemy, became the stuff of military legend. He transformed Egypt's loose sphere of influence into a well-administered empire. The sons of vassal kings were brought to Egypt to be raised and educated as Egyptians, ensuring their future loyalty. A constant stream of tribute, gold, silver, timber, copper, horses, and slaves flowed from the conquered territories into the coffers of Egypt, making it the wealthiest nation on earth. The succeeding generations reaped the rewards of this military might. The reign of Amenhotep III, grandson of Thutmose III, marked the absolute zenith of the new kingdom's power, wealth, and artistic achievement. His was an age of unprecedented luxury, grandeur, and international diplomacy. Amenhotep the Magnificent, as he was known, preferred diplomacy to war. The empire was secure, and he ruled over a period of peace and prosperity. The so-called Amarna letters, a trove of diplomatic correspondence found in a later capital, reveal a world where the Pharaoh of Egypt was the undisputed great king, addressed as a brother by the rulers of Babylonia, Assyria, and Mitanni, who wrote to him begging for Egyptian gold, for gold in your country is as common as dust. Amenhotep III used this immense wealth to embark on a building program on a scale not seen since the Pyramid Age. He built the magnificent Luxor Temple in the heart of Thebes, with its grand colonnades and courts. He constructed a sprawling new palace complex known as Malkata, the dazzling Aten, a veritable city on the West Bank. His own mortuary temple was the largest ever built, though today only 2 colossal statues of the king, known as the Colossi of Memnon, remain to mark its entrance. Art during his reign reached a new peak of sophistication and elegance, with a refined and sometimes naturalistic style that foreshadowed the revolutionary changes to come. All of this imperial wealth, particularly the gold from Nubia and the tribute from Asia, flowed into one place above all others, the temple precincts of the state god, Amun-Ra. The priests of Amun, based at the Temple of Karnak in Thebes, became the wealthiest and most powerful institution in the country, second only to the pharaoh himself. Karnak was the largest religious complex in the world, a sprawling city of temples, chapels, pylons, and obelisks, built and expanded by pharaoh after pharaoh. Its great hypostyle hall, a forest of 134 massive papyrus columns, was a breathtaking architectural marvel, designed to awe the mortal visitor with the power of the gods. The priesthood controlled vast estates, owned fleets of ships, and commanded their own workforce. Their political influence was immense, to the point where they could rival the authority of the king. As the pharaohs of the new kingdom sought to secure their eternal afterlife, they abandoned the conspicuous and easily robbed pyramids of old. They chose instead to hide their tombs in a remote, desolate valley in the Theban hills, a place of searing heat and dramatic cliffs, now known as the Valley of the Kings. Here, hidden from view, royal work crews tunneled deep into the rock, creating secret corridors and chambers that they would decorate with the most elaborate and beautiful religious texts and imagery. These tombs, like the famous tomb of Tutankhamun, were not just burial places but resurrection machines, filled with all the treasure, furniture, food, and knowledge a pharaoh would need to successfully navigate the perilous journey through the underworld and be reborn into eternal life among the gods. Under Amenhotep III, the Egyptian empire was at its apogee. It was a colossus of gold and military might. Its cultural influence felt throughout the ancient world. It seemed stable, eternal, and invincible. Yet beneath the dazzling surface of imperial splendor, a dangerous tension was growing between the immense power of the pharaonic state and the equally immense power of the Amun priesthood. This growing conflict would soon be brought into the open by Amenhotep III's own son and successor, a strange and revolutionary young king who would challenge the very foundations of Egyptian religion and society and plunge the empire into its greatest internal crisis. The Golden Age was about to be shattered by the world's first religious revolution. The Egyptian Empire, at the death of Amenhotep III, was a gilded colossus, a seemingly eternal edifice of power, tradition, and faith. The priesthood of Amun-Ra, gorged on the tribute of 100 conquered cities, held sway from their bastion at Karnak, their power woven into the very fabric of the state. It was into this world of rigid tradition and unimaginable wealth that a new pharaoh ascended the throne, Amenhotep III's second son, Amenhotep IV. Initially, there was little to suggest the cataclysm to come. He began his reign in the traditional manner at Thebes, commissioning buildings at Karnak. But from the very beginning, there was a subtle yet profound shift in religious focus. The new king showed a particular devotion to a lesser-known aspect of the sun god, the Aten, which was not the anthropomorphic deity Ra, but the physical, tangible disk of the sun itself, whose rays terminated in small hands, offering the Ankh, the sign of life. What began as a shift in emphasis soon escalated into a full-blown revolution, the likes of which Egypt had never seen. In the 5th year of his reign, Amenhotep IV made his radical break. He changed his own name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten. This was a declaration of war against the old pantheon. He then declared the Aten to be the one true universal God, the creator and sustainer of all life, not just in Egypt but across the entire world. All other gods, including the mighty Amun-Ra, were declared false, their mythologies mere fictions. This was not just a religious reformation, it was a theological earthquake. Akhenaten was not merely promoting a new god, he was attempting to erase thousands of years of Egyptian religion. The consequences were immediate and profound. Akhenaten ordered the closure of the temples dedicated to the old gods. Most significantly, he shut down the vast and powerful temple complexes of Amun-Ra at Thebes. This was a direct and devastating assault on the priesthood. He seized their immense wealth, their vast estates, and their political power, redirecting all of it to the service of his new and only god. The name Ammon was systematically chiseled out of monuments throughout the land, a nationwide campaign of iconoclasm aimed at wiping the memory of the old king of the gods from existence. To complete his break with the past, Akhenaten abandoned the traditional religious capital of Thebes. He declared that the Aten itself had chosen a new home, a virgin site in the desolate middle of Egypt, a place untainted by the worship of any other god. On a vast semicircular bay of cliffs, he founded a new capital city, Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten, modern-day Amarna. The city was built with breathtaking speed, a testament to the pharaoh's fanatical devotion. Palaces, administrative buildings, vast open-air temples, and villas for his loyal nobles rose from the desert sand. Unlike the dark, mysterious, enclosed temples of Amun, the temples of the Aten were open to the sky, allowing the sun's rays, the physical manifestation of the god, to flood the courtyards. At the center of this new world were Akhenaten and his great royal wife, the famously beautiful Nefertiti. The theology of Atenism was as radical as its implementation. The Aten was a distant, universal god, beyond human comprehension. There were no statues, no elaborate mythologies of underworld journeys. The sole intermediaries between humanity and this supreme god were the royal family. The people were not to worship the Aten directly, but to worship Akhenaten and Nefertiti, who in turn were the only ones who could commune with their divine father, the sun disk. The religion was centered entirely on their divine status. This revolution was mirrored in the art of the period. Akhenaten discarded the rigid, idealized conventions of traditional Egyptian art, which had remained largely unchanged for millennia. He commanded a new style, one that was shockingly naturalistic, even grotesque to some. In Amarna art, Akhenaten is depicted not as a perfect muscular hero, but with a strangely elongated skull, a long thin neck, a drooping pot belly, wide hips and spindly legs. Nefertiti and their 6 daughters are shown with similarly exaggerated features. The reason for this bizarre style is hotly debated. Was it a true-to-life depiction of a genetic condition, or was it a new religious symbolism, portraying the pharaoh as an androgynous, super-fertile being who embodied both the male and female creative principles of his sole god? The art also depicted scenes of unprecedented intimacy and naturalism. The king is shown kissing his wife, dandling his daughters on his knee, and mourning their deaths. It was a deeply personal and human art style, utterly alien to everything that had come before. Nefertiti herself was depicted with extraordinary power, sometimes even shown in the classic pharaonic pose of smiting Egypt's enemies, a role traditionally reserved for the male king. While Akhenaten was consumed by his religious and artistic revolution, the empire his ancestors had bled to build began to fray at the edges. The Amarna letters, the diplomatic archive found at the site, paint a desperate picture. Vassal kings in Syria and Palestine wrote frantic letters to their Egyptian overlord, pleading for troops and aid against the rising power of the Hittites and opportunistic local rivals. The king's lands are being lost, one wrote, but Akhenaten, the universalist, seemed largely indifferent to the petty squabbles of his imperial subjects. His focus was on the heavens, not on the messy realities of earthly politics. The Egyptian army, once the most feared in the ancient world, was neglected, and Egypt's prestige and influence abroad began to crumble. Akhenaten's revolution was a top-down affair, imposed by the will of an absolute monarch. It was never popular with the common people, who were deeply attached to their traditional gods, their local festivals, and their beliefs in the afterlife presided over by Osiris, a comforting vision that Atenism completely discarded. The dispossessed priests of Amun surely fanned the flames of this silent resentment. After 17 years of rule from his isolated desert capital, Akhenaten died. His end is shrouded in mystery. The succession was confused. A mysterious pharaoh named Smenkhkare reigned for a very short time before also disappearing. The throne then passed to a 9-year-old boy, Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten. He was likely Akhenaten's son, and he was married to Akhenaten's 3rd daughter, Ankhesenpaten. This boy king was a puppet in the hands of powerful traditionalist courtiers, most notably the elderly Vizier I, and the commander of the armies, General Horemheb. Under their guidance, the Counter-Reformation began. Within a few years, the young pharaoh officially abandoned the Atenist heresy. He changed his name to the one the world now knows, Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. His wife became Ankhesenamun. The court abandoned the city of Akhetaten, leaving it to crumble back into the desert dust from which it had so briefly arisen. They returned to the traditional capitals of Memphis and Thebes. Tutankhamun issued a restoration stela, a royal decree that described the Amarna period as a time of disaster when the gods had abandoned Egypt. The stela details his pious works, reopening the temples, recarving the statues of the gods, restoring the priesthoods, and making the land right with the divine order of Ma'at once more. Tutankhamun's reign was short. He died unexpectedly at the age of around 19, leaving no heir. His death is another of Egypt's great mysteries. While long suspected to be murder, modern analysis suggests it was likely a combination of congenital health issues and a severe leg fracture that became infected. He was buried in a surprisingly small tomb in the Valley of the Kings, likely a tomb originally intended for a noble that was hastily enlarged for the king's unexpected death. It was this small, insignificant tomb that would, by a quirk of fate, become his greatest legacy. Its entrance was soon covered by the debris from the construction of a later, larger tomb, hiding it from the waves of tomb robbers who would ransack nearly every other royal burial in the valley. With Tutankhamun's death, the 18th dynasty effectively ended. His widow Ankhesenamun made a desperate and unprecedented move, writing to the Hittite king and begging him to send one of his sons to marry her and become pharaoh of Egypt. The Hittite prince was sent, but was murdered on his journey, likely by factions at the Egyptian court who would not tolerate a foreigner on the throne. The elderly vizier I briefly became pharaoh, followed by the general Horemheb. Horemheb was a traditionalist and a military man. He was the great restorer, but also the great eraser. He instituted a systematic campaign of damnatio memoria, the damnation of memory, against Akhenaten, Tutankhamun and I. He declared them heretics and usurpers, and decreed that their names be physically chiseled off every monument in Egypt. In official records, the period from Amenhotep III to Horemheb was erased, as if the Amarna pharaohs had never existed. The stones of Akhenaten's temples at Karnak and his capital at Akhetaten were dismantled and used as rubble fill for Horemheb's own new constructions. The heretic king was to be forgotten for all eternity. For over 3,000 years he was. It was only with the rediscovery of Akhetaten in the 19th century and the spectacular discovery of Tutankhamun's intact tomb by Howard Carter in 1922 that this most fascinating and bizarre chapter of Egyptian history was resurrected from the sands of time. The boy king, a minor figure in his own day, became the most famous pharaoh of all, the golden symbol of ancient Egypt, and the key that unlocked the lost story of the heretic who dared to defy 1,000 gods. The stage was now set for a new dynasty, the Ramessides, who would seek to restore the glory of the empire and build on a scale that would rival the gods themselves.